I hope everyone had a good short break. You have your refreshments. Yeah. All right, my name is Vusi Fele. I am working at Absa, and my current title at Absa is a Chief Procurement Officer for the group. We operate in 12 jurisdictions across the globe. It's a pleasure and an honor. I'm humbled to be standing in front of you here to facilitate this closing session on a very important subject that we've been deliberating about over the past 2 days, including now. Talking about a very important sector of our economy, which is very core, i.e. small businesses, in terms of inclusive industrial policy for our country. And when we look at the National Development Plan 2030, which is our country's long-term plan to achieve inclusive growth, prosperity, and improvement of the quality of life for all our citizens, the NDP unequivocally recognizes that small business is critical in playing a supporting role in all our value chains, especially mainstream value chains, as well as very critical as economic multipliers, which result therefore in job contribution and also therefore social cohesion. So the research work that's been done and also the abstracts that have been presented here and the time that has been invested by all of you executives here and academia is quite important. Is a great investment into what you're trying to achieve as a country jointly. The seventh administration is talking about seriously looking at a social compact, and all of us in this room must and will contribute to the social compact, because without us as a component of that for that social compact, and with all the brain power that is here, this discourse must not just be a research paper that will end up in a journal somewhere. How can we have indelible impact? So when you come and meet perhaps next tips, looking at our chief executive here for tips, Dr. Saul, Levin, we have some markers that we say we have been there, now we're here. So allow me to welcome our esteemed panel members who will help us identify some of the obstacles facing SMMEs and perhaps also assist us to ground the strategies required to effectively implement this industrial inclusive policy, and how can we achieve industrial inclusion, taking care of all the component parts thereof. We've got in our panel, starting not in any order of importance, Nomvuyo Guma, who is the Chief Director for Macroeconomic Policy in the National Treasury. We've got Dr. Saul Levin, who is the Executive Director, as mentioned, for TIPS. And then we've got Dr. Rendani Mamphiswana, who wears many titles, but I'll lift up. He's the Head of Research and Innovation at NAFASI Water Technologies. Then we've got my colleague, Manthata, who is a Senior Regional and Sector Specialist at Absa Group, who are going to help us and talk us through this subject. How do we identify obstacles that are facing SMEs, and how then do we implement the inclusive industrial policy? What strategies can we think about? And then I want to invite us all in terms of inputs and questions, because it's a discussion is for all of us. So allow me therefore just to start up the engine. And initially, Dr. Saul, Levin, when I looked at the word TIPS, tips, it made me think, how much must we pay as a tip? A long time ago, I learned that the word tip stands for to ensure prompt service, right? And now it is the S services, right? So the first opening question that just as a starter that we're going to look at, these are not questions, these are just discussion triggers. Yeah. For all of us, just as part of introduction to the panel. What do we think are the key barriers preventing SMEs from fully participating in value chains? And how can industrial policy address these barriers to foster greater inclusion? So I'm going to give my panel just some time to, whoever's ready as a start, and then we just go down the line and just talk us through.
All right, thanks, Vusi, for the introduction. I think for me, the lens that I'm going to use in terms of responding to the first question would be on two approaches. First part being that, there are cases where value chains already exist. There are spaces where value chains don't yet exist. And the challenges are different. And I think it's important that we separate these things. Otherwise, when you try to lump them all together, we end up creating solutions that don't perhaps give us the right answers. So when value chains already exist, the key question is, what are the capacities and the capabilities that the SMEs need to have for them to competitively participate? And I think when we are dealing with existing value chains, then the question for industrial policy is, how do we help SMEs close that particular gap? And I think the conversation now around policy is about being specific. It's no longer about issuing generic policies. And I think this is one specific item from an industrial policy point of view that one can then look at. When we are dealing with spaces of new value chains, and I think Saul touched a little bit on that yesterday, that part of what industrial policy needs to think about is, where are the growth areas coming into? And in that particular context, then the question of industrial policies, then how do we make sure that when we create industrial policy, they are co-created in view of inclusivity, so that various actors can participate. So I think largely the barrier for me, I look at it from a capacity and a capability point of view, and the role of industrial policy must be first and foremost to help to close that particular gap. So there's a big chunk of work on industrial policy on capacity and capability building, so that SMEs can participate. Otherwise, because if they can't competitively participate, it makes it very difficult for them to be included in the value chains.
I'll go next. Vusi, my name is Nomvuyo. People like to rename me Nomvula. So we know rain is important, but I would argue that joy is equally so. So from, I guess I'll, wear my Treasury hat now and say that if you go back to the start, there are a whole lot of issues that would affect SMEs and their participation in value chains. But as a starting point, we look at it from a point of view of, what does the economy look like? And we know that South Africa is a highly, highly concentrated economy. So to begin with, there are only so many value chains. There are only so many opportunities for SMEs. And the more concentration you have, the more of a barrier to entry you actually have. And there have been a number of studies that have actually confirmed this, including by the Competition Commission. So we know that from the research that when you have high levels of concentration, that ends up stifling innovation, it ends up stifling investment, it ends up stifling the dynamism of your economy. So even the startup rate for SMEs is low. And we know that South Africa, for example, really stands out in the global scale with regard to the low rate of startups. So for us, the starting point is, how do you open that space? How do you start to make the economy less concentrated so that you're actually opening up opportunities for SMEs? And from our point of view, I think that there's a big role that one could play here in terms of competition policy. People often look particularly to the Treasury because they think funding is the answer, but you need to start with what is the lie of the land? You know, how competitive is it? How easy is it for you to actually enter and then succeed and grow? And we had some very interesting data that's out. One of the studies that we track is the OECD's product market survey. So this ranks South Africa against some OECD and OECD countries. And what the study tries to do is look at how restrictive the space is. Now, in the 2018 survey, South Africa came dead last out of almost 50 countries surveyed for the restrictiveness of the product market environment. And unfortunately, they've just released the 2024 survey, and we haven't really moved the needle at all. In fact, when you look at on a scale, they measured on a scale of 0 to 6. And South Africa's barriers to entry in the product market space, and then licensing and permitting. So barriers to entry, we score 5.5 out of 6, with 6 being the most restrictive. And for licensing and permitting, we scored 6 out of 6. So there's a lot that one can do just in terms of removing regulatory barriers, removing red tape, and then you can get into the detail around skills, around financing, and then how practically SMEs start to plug in. But from our point of view, there's something fundamentally wrong with the structure of the economy that we need to try and fix first.
I think latching on to what's been said, particularly when it comes to innovation, you know, and the concentration of SMEs in one sector or in one area of the economy, is I think we need to also start capacitating our entrepreneurs in thinking differently about how they develop themselves as entrepreneurs. I think we need to shift and apply the principles of entrepreneurial marketing, where it's not about having a product and then going to market, but just, you know, sticking to the basic principles of identifying what the need is. If there's a concentration in a specific sector, there must be a lack in a different sector. So how do we ensure that our SMEs and our entrepreneurs are able to have an entrepreneurial mindset that they can activate and actually find those opportunities? And now if we fast forward to a point where, let's say we've got a perfect picture that our entrepreneurs are actually alert and they're innovative, how do we then bring them into the supply chain, which is, you know, the question that we are now addressing? Then we'd have to open up markets to them. We need to have some visibility of those innovative entrepreneurs who are able to tap into the supply chain from a corporate perspective and from a public sector perspective. So I think whilst we are solving for one aspect of the sector, of the industry, or rather the segment, we need to also think about the end goal and develop all these processes in simulation to ensure that those that are already innovating, they do not lack, so rather they do not lose the enthusiasm and end up not being able to access the markets through, or rather distribution through corporates and through public sector, in ensuring that whatever that they've innovated gets to see the day of light and actually develops.
Thanks. Just building on from what Vuyo was saying, that when we're looking at the structure of the economy, part of the value chains see a lot of concentration on the upstream, which means the pricing of inputs are unusually high. When we do research and we look, for example, at what China does, they look at the whole value chain and they say, okay, there's an expensive input here. It's how can we subsidize that to unlock downstream growth? And often it's where small businesses, not always, but often small businesses sit on the downstream of a value chain. And if your inputs are too high and your inputs are not able to even give the right quality or quantities to small businesses in the way that they need it, then it creates a blockage to even, you know, getting your foot in the market, because you just can't compete with the inputs, because, you know, and we've heard it in many industries, but steel in particular, that guys say they can't land, so their raw material costs are the same as the landed finishing costs, which means there's no point in even starting to make the product if the raw material is so expensive. So those, if we're looking at interventions, is how do we look at, the pricing across the value chain? And people often say, let's beneficiate our minerals, but we can't beneficiate the minerals if the input costs are just too expensive. So then we export the minerals, and another country takes advantage of those inputs because we shoot ourselves in the foot on our industrial policy and our industrial strategy around it. Thanks.
So just on that last point, Saul, when we talk about understanding the market structure and therefore attempt to create competitiveness, will we not be seen to be protecting the market, not allowing the market forces to play, and government therefore seen to be interventionist government?
Yes. So government intervenes in markets every single day. As a bank, you have a myriad of regulations and compliance requirements that are beneficial because there's a reason for that regulation. And there's a reason, I feel confident putting my money into a bank because I know when I go get it, it's going to still be there. Unless someone's hacked it, but that would be my fault. But because I've given them my PIN number. So all of these things. So how we think about markets is we have a market, but it's a managed market, and we want to get that balance right. And it is a balance we always need to look at. How much protection do we give, and how do we make it so that it doesn't raise the cost structure of our economy? So there's an ongoing fight, for example, in with the poultry and chicken, where do we raise the tariffs to protect our very big industry? We produce 22 million birds a week, which feeds our country, or do we lower our tariffs and allow cheaper imports because people need a protein that is cheaper? There's a balance somewhere between that, but you can't just look at that in isolation, and that's where I think industrial policy comes in, where we have to say, what are we doing to work with the industry to make it more competitive over time? What are we doing to work with that value chain so that the feed that comes in, because your biggest cost in that industry, for example, is feed, how are we working to lower the cost of your biggest input so that you can be more competitive, not only in your production processes using technology, but also the inputs. So then we lowering the cost domestically, and then we can compete and even export. So those are the kind of things that industrial policy would say, okay, how do we open up the opportunities and have a strategy around it so that over time we become more competitive and create the jobs, because that's really also what we want to do with all of this.
Thanks for that remark. So we understand, ladies and gentlemen, that regulations are not necessarily the evil. It's how we interact with the regulations, especially entrepreneurs, because then entrepreneurs are to be solution providers and work within that. So thanks for that point. Because sometimes people say, no, we're in a regulated market, there's protection, blah, 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 I can't do X, Y, Z. But also somebody just reminded me that as well, that online, that the SMMEs, as much as the NDP places much reliance on the SME creating a massive number of jobs by 2030, which is about 11 million jobs, if my number is still correct. And but we note that the starting up is difficult. Yeah. And they fail, most of them, within the first 3 years, if they last that long. So think about that as well in terms of how then can we show up and sustain the SMME, one from a development stage, and then till they're able, therefore, Dr. Levin, to be competitive. What do you think we can do from a policy perspective and also then from a collaboration perspective. This is the last closing question comes from online. I just want to close this part and then come to the other last talk. Anybody who wants to take that?
I think streamlining regulatory processes or requirements, you know, to simplify it to the level of an SME. And I think by doing so, we have to again remember the various sectors that they operate within. If we streamline a manufacturing regulatory requirement in terms of certification and the likes, it depends on which subsector of manufacturing that SME is operating in. And if we look again in terms of the support that we can give from a private sector perspective, it comes in with, you know, ensuring that we are able to support startups. How do we support startups? I know we all know about enterprise development. And at Absa, we do have an enterprise development, you know, team that looks at supporting startups, basing the support on really tangible cash flow projections that the business would have. A startup does not have money to start that business. But if we've got a viable business plan or a business proposition that can actually, you know, withstand the various checks and balances that it will undergo, then you are able to access some of the funds that you would need to start your business. That again brings us back to the conversation of innovation. Is your product innovative enough to actually crack the market and be sustainable as a startup? So it all goes back to ensuring that we are able to build that capacity and train and support and develop our entrepreneurs to be innovative.
Thank you so much. Rendani?
Thanks. So I think just to try and wrap up on the question around startups and failures, I think we do tend to be quite obsessed with the failure rate. I think from an innovation point of view, failing happens. It will happen. I don't think it's something that we must be concerned about. What's important is when an entrepreneur has failed, does he have another opportunity to start another business and succeed?
Mm-hmm.
And I think we must be making our reflections much more on what caused the failure. And I think we need more research from an SME point of view, where there's not just a lot of blanketing, but where we're actually understanding from a causality point of view, what caused it to fail, so that when the entrepreneur is given another chance to start the next business, those gaps have been identified and have been addressed. So I think let's lessen up on the failure part, because I think we get overly too invested in it and it's not entirely helping us.
So Dr. Mamphiswana, what you're saying therefore, in the life cycle of an entrepreneur, failure is a given. However, what lessons are we taking to move us forward? But I think also from a policy perspective, if we look at how can we say we have these policies, we have not seen the impact thereof, what can we learn from what we tried as programs and build on going forward? That's what I'm taking away from this. So talking about research, you talk about research, Dr. Mamphiswana. And I used to work for an entity where the budget research was huge, just on research development, right? And SMEs don't have that muscle at all, even when they do start up their product. So what do you think the government and the policies that the government put together can better support the research and development to ignite innovation among the SMEs as well? And what do you think, therefore, once you tell us about what problems you foresee and what lessons we can take from research and development, and what innovation in today's climate we need to bring about to ensure success through research and development?
All right, no, thanks. I think it's important to highlight that from a government point of view, through the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation, on the 2019 white paper on science, technology and innovation, there is a clear policy intent in terms of local innovation system development, the creation of an enabling innovation environment, which includes a supporting of SMMEs. So I think from a policy intent point of view, and I think it's important that we separate issues again, that from a policy point of view, there's a clear position in terms of what government wants to do. And I think on top of that as well, the IPR Act of 2008 is the Intellectual Property Act for publicly funded research, recognizes that SMMEs must be the first beneficiary of the technologies or the research outputs that comes out of the universities. So from a government policy point of view, that's a position of the state, that the technologies that were funded by the state must benefit all South Africans, and that you're actually not allowed to ship that technology abroad until you have exhausted all options for the transfer of that technology to local entities, and SMMEs being the preferred option. What is not happening is how do we then ensure the operationalization of the act? And I think that's a bigger question. So it's not a question of new policies from where I'm standing. It's a question also, how do we operationalize? And I want us to look at it in two ways. So on the one hand, all the 22 universities have some level of a technology transfer office. I think it's important that the technology transfer office must have around itself a number of SMMEs that are linked to the technologies or the sectors that they are working with. On the other hand, when you're an SMME owner, you must, understanding what sector you are in, you must ask yourself, which university does research in my area of my sector? And then you need to make sure that you are somehow married or in alliance, in alignment with that particular university, so that some of the work can be issued. I mean, the TIPS Forum here is also in partnership with the SACHI chair. And the question is, how many SMME owners have gone to Professor Tragena and say, you're doing work in this particular value chain on technological upgrading. You know, I want some research on how I can do technological upgrading in my sector and be more competitive. What else have you found in your research, and how can we translate it to what we're doing? I think there is a two-way arrangement that we need to look at. But the key thing is we recognize that SMMEs don't have the resourcing, but the approach now is how do you transfer those technologies then to them? And in some instances, I did think about this earlier on, that we might need a space where, you know, there's some level of enabling some doctoral holders to go work for some of these SMMEs, but not paid by the SMMEs, perhaps paid by the state or by some association, so that there is that intellectual capability inside the particular SMMEs to drive progress.
Follow up here. Thank you. So, great. You may add.
Yeah, just to build on that. I mean, so we've got universities, we've got technical infrastructure that can support enterprises, but we need to do more. So we're not breaking down the barriers that allow businesses and universities or research institutions to connect properly. And so, I mean, we have been looking at that for our technology observatory, is how do we break down those barriers? We've got technology stations that DSI has set up, and waving at the people involved in the project, that are there to assist enterprises. But often the enterprises don't know what's out there and how to access it. So breaking down those barriers. When we look at internationally, universities have open days where they invite, you know, firms to come in, see what technologies are, how they can support them. Things around how do enterprises understand what are the best technologies and new technologies, where they're getting their information from. There's a lot of inhibitors for them to get that information, where that information exists out there and in publicly funded institutions. It's creating those partnerships. And I think another area is around public institutions that are there to support, like the South African Bureau of Standards. How do we improve their role? They used to have that capacity. They've lost that capacity through underfunding or mismanagement or shooting own goals. We're now repairing those institutions. How do we get them to reorientate to, again, support small enterprises with the kind of support that they may need, from a lab or testing situation where, as you say, it's too expensive to have in-house. You want to go somewhere that can assist you.
Thank you so much, Nomvuyo. Was a Vuyo for this time.
Thank you. Thank
Right.
you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just quickly wanted to make a point building on what Saul said, because it's absolutely true from a policy point of view.
Mhm.
Your policies largely can only be as good as the data you have, right? You need to be able to plan, you need to analyze, you need to be able to evaluate whether the policies are having the appropriate effect. And in the SMME space, that's really, really difficult to do. You have a plethora of databases, they're not necessarily integrated, they don't necessarily answer all of the questions that you would want to know. So we've made some great strides because we have at the Treasury an administrative database from SARS with anonymized data. But it really kind of has struck me that we don't have, for example, a national survey that SA does, for example, of SMMEs that's integrated into things like the GDP data. So I think as a start, there's definitely a conversation to be had within government around how do you strengthen data capturing and collection and creating these kinds of databases that then are available for researchers to be able to give government feedback on the effectiveness of these policy interventions.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Perhaps just closing off this question quickly. Do you think, as I said, we bemoan, I heard some of the things that we bemoan here, is the accessibility of information, awareness of what the support mechanisms are there, the policies are there here in terms of support and research and development. There are budgets that ministers go to the parliament and say, we want this money for XYZ. But do you think perhaps the skills level the country have got an effect in terms of people understanding what's out there? Because the entrepreneurs that we see coming in, because we've got a large number of, if we look at all the research papers and publications, South Africa's got quite a varied landscape of informal businesses and formal businesses. And some people that enter into the entrepreneur space go there as a means of necessity than a mission and a purpose. So how can we solve the skills side for people? No, because I can look at this protea flower and for me, just something that is pink and green. How do we bridge that gap from a policy perspective and impact?
I'm going to look at it almost from the other way around. Irrespective, I have the exact number here. So at last count, there were 7 direct support programs for SMMEs and 25 indirect support programs throughout broader government. That's just at kind of the national level. Then if you drill down to subnational, you get a whole lot more. And in the private sector, you get a whole lot more. So irrespective of your level of education or skill, navigating this really complex environment in which you're looking for support just takes up a lot of time. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, it's a lot of knocking on doors that aren't necessarily going to be your door. And I think that high cost involved really doesn't have so much to do with skill. It really is a question around access. So we tried a couple of years ago to start up a small business and innovation fund. The grand plan was that eventually you'd have both CEDA and CIFA kind of collapsed into this. There was a partnership with the private sector, which has now gone on to be the SA SME fund. The idea was that you'd have this kind of one big fund with low costs and one entry point for everybody. But the trade-off there is that then you don't get the kind of niche support or assistance that some entrepreneurs need. And then you kind of have this aggregate level and not necessarily the targeted industry specific kind of support that you need. So, government, we don't have all the answers. We've experimented with a couple of things. Certainly we welcome feedback from researchers like those present in terms of how one actually tries to navigate this. But so I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think it's a balance of scaling up the effectiveness, getting in information out there and making sure that people know that these programs actually exist.
Thank you so much. Our joy giver today. There's an input from Lindy online. She says most regulations, procedures, and requirements come with one size fits all at implementation level. And business development officials not being alert that there is a distance between micro, small, and medium enterprises. And the distance is not just small, it is long. Right? So she says as a comment. Now, I'll do a favor, says Nomvuyo, just because you were speaking now. You go to Kgabi. Kgabi, this one is for you. In your view, what are some of the unique financial needs and behaviors of informal and township-based businesses? And yesterday, there was some input in terms of the financing streams as well. Maybe you can add in terms of your own view, right? And working for a financial institution that I think will give us great insights.
I think I wouldn't call it unique. I think or unique to townships. I think it's something that we're seeing that does happen also in mature businesses that are not necessarily in the township, but because the question is, is directed at what we're seeing SMMEs and what's coming out of townships. I think the discipline and financial literacies such as cash flow management. I mean, businesses that are in townships are really, really running on tight margins. What comes in is what probably is going to stock up, for the next week. And what we need to start seeing happening with our SMEs is actually at the very basic levels, understanding the importance of accurate cash flow forecasting in terms of understanding that if they are, selling, what are the seasonal fluctuations that are going to affect their business and not be caught off guard when those eventualities happen that are actually regular that they can expect and anticipate.
Yeah.
So those little nuances that, come with financial management are actually what is needed, with our entrepreneurs and our businesses in the township and planning for that. I want to also add, in terms of, understanding debt and understanding the importance of matching debt maturity to, the life cycle of the asset. Because if you extend, the tenor of your debt repayment, you are now going to incur a lot more interest on what you pay on that particular asset. And it is important to actually understand those fundamentals and say, am I able to actually, finance this particular asset? And what are the terms of those of that particular asset? And how do I then ensure that it's sustainable in terms of my financial management?
Okay.
I think one other thing that I wanted to mention is insurance. We need products to be developed that are actually key for our SMEs in townships.
Okay.
They are at the risk of, adverse weather conditions, theft, medical conditions that stop them from operating their businesses. So such products need to be developed that actually go or rather that focus on the needs of SMEs and understand how they can actually be underwritten, to cater for those particular markets, which again will enable business continuity for SMEs. I think there's a lot more that we can talk about, but I'll leave it here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Looking at, I don't know whether it's a favor of the policy, township economies, right, is mentioned in almost every place, right? And Dr. Mamphiswana, from a research perspective, what can we do? Because we look at the is there an issue with an infrastructure, or is a problem of township economic structural? Right? Vis-a-vis sophisticated economies that even somebody just you move from Soweto to something a different approach, right? So if I look at Soweto, the business out there, they want bread today, right? And theirs is to support the need of today. The client walks in, but not long-term thinking. Can policy interventions change structural composition of the approaches to township? Right? I'll tell you why I'm saying that. In my job, in my role, and many times I've seen that all over, wherever I've gone, whether different industries I've been at. And I will quote one example in the mining industry. Whereas part of the policy interventions were required as part of the SLP, then we have to procure goods and services from the local communities. And part of that, if I remember, that structure was capital goods, consumer goods, etc. Right? And we were told you will procure 10% in Carltonville without understanding the composition of and the nature of the business in that place. So what can we do differently?
Okay, so I mean, I think
If that makes sense, if the question, I get lost in translation sometimes happening.
no, it's fine. I think I get where you are trying to get to. I mean, I think we must pull back to reflect on what research is. Research is to search again. And that's precisely what we're doing when we do research. It can be for short term, it can be for medium term, it can be for long term. When in long term, then we'll talk about blue sky, R&D and all of that. So, you know, if an SMME has to deal with, you know, a particular set of clients with immediate problems, they can be engaged in some level of research or be supported on that research so that they're able to meet the needs of their clients as they're happening on a regular basis. Obviously, at a particular time, they might not be able to engage on anything long-term because they are dealing with a number of short-term issues, which then can be a constraint for them at that moment. So there is some level of search that they can engage in or that can be supported to so that they're able to deliver. I think there was a talk earlier on about projections, understanding that you want to make X amount of money by end of the month. If you're not able to make that, you know, what are the constraints? And I think it's important that we support SMMEs from that perspective, that they understand how they're able to meet their targets, which is also linked to their debt and all of those other aspects. But I think coming to the other point, I think at Gauteng, I am part of the board for the Innovation Hub. And I think broadly as Gauteng, there is a position around the township revitalization, and the Innovation Hub as well as an entity over the years has established a number of campuses, if I can put it like that, to try and provide technology and technical support that a particular entrepreneur who is in Soweto or in the Val might not have been able to access that. So there is an effort to being able to do that. And I think the key thing is how do we make sure that those facilities are of the highest standard so that even an entrepreneur who is in Harankuwa, you know, can get a level of support that allows them to make progress. Because ultimately, why are we supporting them? So they can make progress. Yeah. What progress are they trying to do? And to make sure that we match their particular progress to where they are. And I think that's one of the key things when one makes a reflection around innovation. And I want to reflect on the study that Glenda Krause from the HSRC have recently done. Yeah. And what they focus on was, instead of having blanket statements around innovation support, is how are these entities innovating, right? And make sure that we first of all understand, are they innovating by technology import? Are they innovating by just purely selling products? And then you tailor your innovation support on where they are, instead of just throwing, you know, blanket support that it's actually a mismatch in terms of what the entities are doing. And I think that's a big part of the work that we need to do going forward. There must always be an understanding of where things are. I think, and Nomvuyo spoke about earlier on in terms of policy as well, that if you're not looping it back with the data, then on the one side, you are issuing things, but you're not bringing them back to then be able to close the loop. So
I'm hearing you say there, we need to have fit for purpose approaches in the differing economic sectors. Yeah. So Nomvuyo, maybe can you help us a bit here? How do you think government can better coordinate itself and the stakeholders relevant to create a cohesive and supportive environment for SMME development?
Look, I think let's firstly start with acknowledging a number of things that government already is doing, right? Because there are quite a few, as I said, on budget support programs. There are quite a few public sector programs. Government supports SMMEs through tax policy, through procurement policy, and then also through things like trade and competition policy. So, I start there because I think people tend to think about government support for SMMEs in a very narrow, focused funding way, when actually government support spreads across quite a couple of arenas. And then if you were to also add in things like reducing regulatory barriers and barriers to entry and high levels of concentration, then all the other things that government actually needs to do to just get growth going so that SMMEs also have an environment that is dynamic into which they can grow, then you realize that there's quite a lot of coordination that needs to happen. For me, I think what is really important to do, let's just say in the short term, is to really think about how offices like the Red Tape Office in the presidency can be used to coordinate certain things. So how do you make sure that you, even if you don't reduce the number of government support programs, how do you make sure that there's a central place that people know that they can go to get the right kind of information? How do you make sure that thinking about SMMEs is actually inculcated in the kind of policy development that happens in different government departments and at the different levels of government? And so really, I think that that's what that office was set up to think about, or to help think about. And I think that with the new administration, I think that there's a lot of impetus to get that kind of thinking and any kind of innovations that might come out of that office going. I joke and I call it my side hustle, because I also co-head Operation Vulindlela, which has been involved in kind of electricity reform, logistics reform, and some of the techniques that we use there around creating partnerships, around coordinating around government, certainly are available in the presidency and can be used to bulk up and bump up the impact and effectiveness of that office quite significantly.
Thank you. Well, let me just before we follow up, right? There's a comment from a previous discussion from Ronald Rahuashwa. He says so-called township economy as well as peri-urban food production is a critical link between rural and urban economies. This is an area that can structurally transform the economy. Any differing views on that one? But let's not go there when I come back. So let me come to Dr. Saul Levin. Talk about all things finances, right? From your perspective, what are the most common challenges SMEs encounter when seeking industrial financing? And how can these challenges be effectively addressed? And a long time ago, somebody who was wise, I think they were, told me that as an entrepreneur, capital should not be a problem. Your problem must be a bankable idea that would then attract financing.
Okay, so I mean, yeah, you do need the ideas, but you also need the cash sometimes. So I mean, one of the problems that in some of the research we've done is around the long-term investments. So often you can find a way of making a plan with cash for working capital. Asset finance is probably the easiest finance. You can, because it's secured against a product. So vehicles, or you can take out a vehicle and asset finance. You've all got VAF units. So those kind of things become a lot easier often than the long-term investments. So you want a machine that isn't payable off over a year. It becomes a bit more of a challenge. You want to build a new office or plant that's even more complicated. So those kind of long range things, I think, are a specific challenge that we do need some innovation around. And then, I mean, part of cash flow is not just getting loan finance; it's making sure your clients pay. And there, I think they're very specific challenges. And government is, there's been various initiatives. And when I was in government, I was involved in some of it to try and adhere to the principle of that 30-day payment rule, because we know that hampering small businesses' cash flow by not paying on time is a death knell for that enterprise. So getting those things right, not only in the public sector, but also the private sector, is very important. So that you can manage, the cash coming in and the cash coming out. And some of the finance issues, I think it's been raised, don't relate to borrowing the money. It's how you manage the internal cash flow and your pricing. I mean, and it also links to the township question you raised earlier, where in the opening session, Dr. Makgetla presented, the demographics in South Africa, and what we can see is that the incomes earned in townships are less. So what happens is the prices you pay need to be less, and so things like services in townships are often cheaper. So haircuts, plumbing, electrical, other types of services you may require are often, they need to be less, which means those businesses are just not getting the cash in order to grow and expand. And that becomes another constraint. And then I think that the last point I'd make on that issue is around track record. Is that when you go to a bank, you need that track record. If you haven't been keeping the books and you haven't had a bank account to just, for your enterprise, you've been using your own account, or you haven't had a bank account at all, you then don't have that track record on which to get the finance. So that becomes a binding constraint, because how do you get the finance to start operating and then, get the loan finance to grow? So you in that circle of not being, or vicious downward spiral, whatever, of not being able to break out of. So those kind of things that the system, what do they call it, a catch-22, that the system doesn't allow you, and you can't get the loans, so you can't break out, which means you'll never get the finance. So those are the kind of things that, if we put our hats on, we can find solutions to. There must be solutions in how we can solve those problems.
Yeah, thank you. So you want to follow up?
Yeah, I just want to say, with our enterprise development, actually, if you have, and as I mentioned earlier, with viable cash flows, we now are actually not looking too strictly or stringently on your historical financial performance. So I mentioned earlier that as a startup, you wouldn't necessarily have those historics. And, that is one of the, the things that we do, that we actually quite, spearheading to ensure that we provide the requisite support at the right level for our SMEs.
I understand, since Nomvuyo coming from National Treasury, that there's a lot of government guarantees earmarked for entrepreneurs. And if Dr. Saul says, therefore, where you find that these SMEs are not financeable because of lack of track record, how come then that we sit in a situation there are guarantees and there are policies that support this? What can we do differently?
So guarantees is a painful word for the Treasury, given.
And that's why I gave it to you.
You just hurt me, given how SOCs have come repeatedly for government guarantees. But I mean, I think to what I was saying earlier, there are various programs, Treasury operates through the budget process. We give money to departments and entities, and it's really for them to make sure that, because that's how a government system works, it's really for them to make sure that the adequate financing or tools are in place for SMEs and entrepreneurs to access. I think there's a question around how that may interface with private sector partners and banks. Perhaps you want to have something that was the original construct around government, around the Small Business and Innovation Fund. The idea there was that you would have government take a first loss, which then de-risks the space. That model, I think, requires probably some updating and some rethinking. I still think it has a good chance of success in its current iteration. It hasn't quite played out in the way that we had initially envisaged. But again, to the point around collecting of data and being willing to constantly update and change your model based on the information that you're getting, I think there's still those opportunities to create partnerships or to repurpose some of the vehicles that already exist in government.
Thank you. What I'm hearing then for National Treasury and government looking at the risk appetite. We talked earlier regarding townships again. Let's go back there. And then there's another question that I think is important for us to ask in the open here from the online people. Understand that townships are rich because they're stockfields. And these stockfields are into the billions. How come, therefore, that we are not able to make them look at those financing mechanisms? And yet we blame banks or financial institutions for their tight risk appetite. What can we do differently in terms of accessing the stockfile funds to show up economic activities and grow SMEs?
So I mean, on that particular one, I think Tsepo Moloi from the Stockfella app, he is trying to figure that out. So there's a lot of work happening in that space.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, so I think if any of you who are looking for those kinds of funds,
yeah,
I think Stockfella app team is trying to reorientate the risk thinking on Stockfellas to participate in larger projects.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think the bigger thing, so I do engage quite a lot on some of this conversation from the thinking on Stockfella to contribute to some level of industrial activities in the townships. And I think the bigger thing is Stockfellas, when they are initiated, there's a particular objective. What you are now doing, you are giving them a different objective. And I mean, they're not just going to wake up tomorrow and jump to your objective. So I think there's a remodeling of, opening up to a different risk profile that needs to happen. But those things are starting to happen. Usually it's not going to happen immediately, but there is a bigger conversation around that those who are in the space are trying to resolve. I think Stockfella is around 300 M around the number of Stockfella in the platform.
Yeah.
But that's a small amount because overall you're looking at 44 billion. So even Stockfella app is not even tapped fully into the entire value chain, but there's conversation about digitalizing, having bank accounts. And I think NetBank or Standard Bank are the two banks that are trying to solve them. I'm not sure how far Absa is engaged on the Stockfella.
Is that a challenge?
Side.
Yeah, we are also in that space. But I wanted to just come to that's what's it. Is there something that we can do from a policy perspective then to ensure that at least we regularize that market and also to protect that money and also the people that don't exploit it?
So, I mean, I think Rendani has said it, we have stockfields that are set up for a particular reason. For them to reorientate, is a possible solution. But we actually also have a banking sector that has almost 7 trillion in loans. So, you're not even on the same scale. So, I mean, I think we can look at the stockfields as one part of a possible solution, but actually there's a lot of other resources out there that are much greater and bigger, and in institutions that do this as their daily activity. So I mean, I wouldn't push the burden. I mean, it's an opportunity, and maybe people can find a way, or, and I'm sure there are, particularly in rural areas, you might find that the people who get their stockfile money, they use it for enterprise, but they're also using it for school fees, for medical bills, for Christmas, whatever, depending on what you've earmarked it for. So, I mean, I think there's a banking sector that can do loans to businesses. So let's not take the spotlight away too much from that.
So what I'm hearing from here, therefore, is that we have some mechanisms in the market. We've got players that already got, from a policy perspective, that we need to ensure that we then show up or educate SMEs how then to play within the current rules, but not stopping innovation, because Tabomolo is trying to be innovative as well, make money for the stockfile groups, right? So yeah, here's a question coming from online, from Pomukwena. Exploring venturing into the automotive manufacturing as an SME, what support on technologies as well as in marketing such resultant products? What support can we get if I want to break through to the automotive industry? Right? Does that make sense? The question is how someone wants to explore into the automotive manufacturing industry, maybe a car for South Africa made by South Africans, I don't know. As an SME, he says, what support on technology as well as in marketing can I access? Yeah. So that I've reread the question and try to interpret it. I think we did talk about earlier support mechanisms that are available already, approaching the development agencies. And I think the Black Industries policy as well stands in good stead to support such ventures. Maybe let's leave it there. And then let me stop here because I'm between you, the lunch, and going home and flying away, right? But I wouldn't be doing justice if I have not heard from us, the plenary. Any questions to the panel and also input, and then I will take also, Keleto, if you can help me take 2 more live comments or questions for line, please, and then we will wrap up. Let me start with you, Intatema, Mpila, and then another hand came up there. Kiabutimang, Yuelen, all right. Kisesimang, Zama. Okay, so let's start. And then Kisesimang, Chantal. Okay. Help me remember these names, right? Okay. So, Abuti Artomega Hawe.
I will then start with a question to Nomvuyo, Guma, National Treasury. We appreciate all the inputs that were made here. And I think the issue of local content and AFCFTA refers it to the rules of origin are very key to unlock business opportunities for local industrialists, quite honestly. And if you look at the Treasury regulations as they are now, they are more of a, they are more open. And I think we need to tighten those bolts and nuts. And, you can advise if Treasury is really working very hard on local content, ensuring that and the other point is on the issue of cooperatives. I heard we spoke about stockfels and social clubs and all that. I think we are sitting with a lot of value with cooperatives untapped. And, it's very funny that in our townships, people can groove together, can put money together, but cannot do business together. And you ask yourself, what exactly the problem is here? Is it a subject of money or who's who in the zoo? I don't know. But I think those are the 2 comments that I would like to make. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Tate. This is Nomvuyo. You want to, Nomvuyo, please. Every time I say Nomvuyo, I need to get you a glass of water, right?
I give up.
Nomvuyo, sorry.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the question. Although I may actually ask you to repeat what the question was on cooperatives, unless that was the comment.
There's a comment.
Okay. So in terms of local content, I mean, this is actually a bit of a contentious and not so simple issue, because in the long run, of course, you want to stimulate the growth of domestic industries. But how you do that has important consequences in the short term. And particularly what we worry about are things like cost raising, the impact on inflation, what that actually means then for things like interest rates, and how that may dampen or impact growth in the short term. So I think one of the things that we're trying to work very hard on is making sure that we and the DTIC are very aligned in terms of how does one progressively support an industry over time while minimizing the potential disruptions or distortions to economic activity that may happen in the short term, and that may then have dampening impacts on downstream sectors as well. So it is a bit of a delicate balancing act. I know it's attractive to kind of say, we need to localize and designate everything, but some of our experiences around that have had serious adverse unintended consequences. And so we are trying to tread as lightly as we can in that space.
All right. Approach Butle. slow, making sure that when we move forward, we don't have to restart again. So I'm getting. About Llewellyn.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Okay, there we
Yeah.
go. Yeah. It has been quite an insightful 2 days, especially added to the fact that I was at the TIPS masterclass event, master plan event, I think 3 weeks ago or a month ago. And I just kind of had a question and I've got a comment. But as a preamble, I would just like to say that yes, it has been very informative, and I'm also quite surprised as a business owner myself, and I just happen to have a weird interest in policy and stuff like that because I've got an economics background. So I'm a weird hybrid in a sense. I'm surprised that I didn't see any input from small business owners at this forum. During these 2 days, because I think that obviously is where you're getting the information you need from the people that are on the ground, So my question is to I guess maybe more to Saul, Dr. Saul, would be, is there a place the where everyone is getting information and input from small like business owners? And if it's not there, is it being created? If it's there, where is it? Because I think that is where a lot of the information it's out there because we are on the ground. My comments just to kind of conclude in terms of like what I wanted to say was that the thing with business that I've seen with my background and where I'm at right now is that, a lot of people think that we get into business for need or whatever, opportunistic, whatever, but some of us, it's just, we want to create wealth.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the objective of creating wealth ultimately seeks to obviously automatically solve the job problem because it's more aggressive, it's more offensive than it is defensive. So what I've seen is that any person who goes to business, and this is just what it is, you go into business, it's either B2B or it's going to B2C, right?
Yeah.
In a B2C context,
Summarize it so that we can get
in a B2C context, as it is, when it comes to the funding and how everything's go, no one's going to be able to have the plant, the manufacturing, the distribution to get to retail, which is obviously why the malls still look the same way as they looked for the last 10, 20 years in our country, because they aren't any new entrance to the market. So just to finalize it, I just wanted to say that I just think that we need to have more input from the people that are on the ground doing the real work, especially the ones that are facing business, because what I've seen now is that success is when it's achieved when we go international.
Yeah.
And so that's basically what my point was.
So what I'm hearing you say that there's a missing link, which is the area of improvement. We need perhaps to involve in the sessions the beneficiaries, SMMEs, right?
Yes, the people that the policies are being drawn from.
Maybe let me just give it back to you just as a last comment and then go to see Chantal, please.
So it's a discussion we have every year when we do our forum because we have different topics.
Yeah.
We focusing on the policy issues. So I mean the researchers and the academics are engaging with businesses all the time, and we talk to businesses on a regular basis when we're doing our research. We're distilling that into what are the policy recommendations. So we're focusing on the policy issues. So we have to trade off the benefits. This is not the National Small Business Conference. It's a very specific focus on small business and industrial policy. So that's the differentiator. The issues you raise about malls, we know that because we are talking to businesses. We're doing research on the retail sector. We're doing research on the manufacturing sector. So, and many of the research that was presented have done extensive. There was the survey for the last session where they, surveyed over 1,000 businesses, and that was presented. So, I mean, there is that trade-off, but yes, I mean, there are other platforms where businesses are engaged directly and are expected and invited to be there.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, since Chantal, you're the last one, and then was Ganesh too.
So I just want to say first and foremost, thank you, because this has been such an informative 2 days. I'm from the Department of Small Business Development, and I'm the Deputy Director of Market Access. So a lot of what was being discussed today was, things we deal with on a daily basis with our SMMEs. especially when it comes to market penetration into our retail stores and all of that, because I loved what Paul was saying about, I almost called you Paul. So I'm like, I'm going on the Nomvuyo thing.
But I haven't seen.
Thank you,
clouds,
thank
so
you for
it's-
the support. You the sister, you the sister.
But yeah, that, you know, pricing is a problem, but it just comes to what I've realized in these 2 days is that we're dealing with a very complex problem.
Yeah.
We're dealing with SMMEs that are dealing with logistics, with you know, electricity problems and all of that. All of that adds to our cost to company, and it makes us less competitive as a country. So for me, like one of the things I've always thought of is that we need to look at infrastructure and looking at basic
Don't go out yet,
local
sir.
economic
Susi Shanta, don't go out yet, sir. I'll close with you. I'll be agile. You raised your hand just as I said, days to stay there. You know, I'll close with you, Mona. Just on you. Then continue, Sister Shanta.
Thank
No,
you.
no. It's
Should I
done. Oh,
continue?
no, Sister Zama, you were, sorry, I jumped you. I'm guilty, people.
Okay.
Sorry.
Can I
Okay,
finish?
just so finish up your thoughts. I'm sorry about that. I have to manage the room as well. So finish up your thought.
Yeah, but I think what it comes down to is that from a basic local level, we
Yeah.
need to be able to have infrastructure for SMMEs to be able to develop. The SEZs need to also be working, you know, I just recently did my master's in cluster development, and I think it's something that South Africa started and then just kind of like let go of. And I loved when dtic yesterday was saying that they are looking at different clusters of SMMEs, because in that there's a lot of support that comes to SMMEs in terms of the regulatory, you know, the lobbying that they need to do for policy reforms and all of that. And I think that's something we're ignoring as a country. I think collaboration, integration needs to happen between government departments, because we have Department of School Business Development, we've got dtic, and then we've got every other department that has small business kind of component.
Yeah.
And
So-
that kind of integration is not happening.
Sister
So,
Dot, I'm hearing
thank
you. You are underscoring the point of collaboration and how do we approach this
and
cohesively,
also who
and then
is
also
one of the
issue of leadership, right? In terms of how do we then make sure that we have champions or a PMO. I think we need to make sure that there's clarity of the different programs and who does what program, but there's a coordination need. What I'm here to say there. And I think you said also, if we look at the special economic zones, how to make sure those are also nuanced and also take into effect where SMEs are at. So Sizama, please, I'm sorry. I did ask my partners, so they didn't want to collaborate with me to remind me. So not blaming them. So you go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to be short, so don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay. My name is Zama from Boss Lane Magazine. Just to address the question of my colleague here. Boss Lane Magazine helps entrepreneurs or SMEs connect, collaborate, and evaluate. So I will try to, send out the information that I've got in here.
Okay.
My question is, I did hear something about the Department of Trade and Industry in terms of SME grading. I think they're considering a grading system for SMMEs. I was wondering if that can be paid with the National Treasury's government guarantees in terms of helping SMEs access funding.
Yeah.
Is that a possibility?
SME grading wants to take that as a question in terms of where we're at. And for small businesses in terms of their grading. And you said you had something about that. From who?
Yeah,
From Sisu Vuyo. Okay, Sisu Vuyo, this is yours.
no, not really.
No doubt.
That would be a DTIC program. And I
Yes.
must confess, I hadn't heard about it. So in terms of the ability to kind of link that with any treasury funding, I think that would depend very much on what the program looks like and what they're aiming to achieve and what the impact of that grading system is. But as I said, we haven't engaged on that yet.
So let's throw that to the next SMB session or to the Minister of Small Businesses. So
I
in
think
that,
so.
yeah, we got you, but
Yeah.
your notes so then I'll go, it will find its way to the right channel. As I said, we're in between you and lunch and also the closing session. We want to close this very important gathering, the brain power here in the right decorum. So apologies, any that has gone wrong, blame it on me today. Abut, what's your name, sir?
Just to clarify, I wasn't leaving out of protest. Just further to the one point about the underground and having small businesses, we did have a side event as part of this event as well that brought together small businesses in waste energy, and there was some cross-sectoral focus as well. There was a display earlier as well of some small businesses in the back where the Absa banners were as well. So on the ground stuff is definitely important and should inform the policy direction, just to add in addition to what Saul mentioned.
Thank you so much. So the link between the data points and then the data should also inform policy, right? So there should not be a dealing between the two. That's what I'm hearing in terms of my own interpretation. So ladies and gentlemen, I have time for you to stop here. Before I stop, if you want to be short, before I stop, must I give it a chance? I'll be killed. Otherwise, they will never call me back here. So I've got a job to protect as well. Yeah. So let's close off. The boss said let's close off. One takeaway from each one of you regarding how can we effectively have an inclusive industrial policy. Just one takeaway that we should all want to think about. And even with our SMEs online listening as well, so they must know that we think about them as well, not just for research papers. Thank you.
So one takeaway is we need to be nimble, and we need to be able to change direction in order to improve our policies and programs.
I think one takeaway is that business is a risk. When you are developing, innovating, always have the risk mindset on hand, because that will help you develop even better.
Key takeaway, I think, is that government actually does support SMMEs across a range of different, in a range of different ways that may not be as visible as they should be to the public. So certainly one of the takeaways, both for the Treasury and for the DSBD, is to think about how we actually scale up the visibility of these, make it easier for SMMEs and entrepreneurs to access.
I think the linkage is to make sure that the technologies can be transferred to SMMEs. I think bridging that gap is quite an important piece that we need to figure out how to make it work. And I think the TTOs are already there. It's a matter of how do we make it actually work so that there is a flow from that perspective. Thank you.
Let's give a big round of applause to our panelists here. Thank you so much. Once we have closed the discussion here, we've got a big lunch network session. So whatever other pending questions you have for the panel, you've seen their faces. I give you permission to hone them. And now on this very point, let's call upon Zukiswa Kimani from the dtic, who is anointed to close the session for us. And then from there we go to lunch, and I'll hand over back to as the panelist is going down. Thank you so much. You were beautiful. There's a group photo.
Good afternoon, everyone. I have just been hijacked by the executive director. So I'm sure many of you expected to see Rudy from the presidency. I'm standing here from the Department of Trade and Industry, and I'm also wearing a hat of being part of the steer core for the TIPS forum. I'm Zukiswa Kimani. I'm from the Department of Trade, Industry and Competition. I'm responsible for coordinating industrial policy and developing industrial policy within the department. I think our task as this collective is quite big. We are facing a massive challenge in South Africa of high unemployment. And that's the reason why we're here today. To having these policy dialogues, they help us shape policy as policymakers. And we also get to hear from the researchers what is happening on the ground when it comes to many programs that all the speakers that we've heard in the last 2 days we have developed and we are implementing within the space of small medium enterprises development in South Africa. It's a conversation that we've been having for a number of years, and I don't know, we are not seemingly breaking through as a country where small medium enterprises are concerned. A number of issues have been raised around concentration that we need to deal with. Where our industrial policy is concerned, meaning that we need to change that structure of the South African economy. And that's what we're trying to do with our industrial policy. How do we bring inclusion? Inclusion, we're talking about whether it's demographics, whether it's geographic, whether it's the type of businesses that we're bringing into the mainstream South African economy. We currently working on an industrial policy framework within the department. And as I was sitting here, unfortunately, I missed yesterday's session. As I was sitting here today, I was thinking, how do we change the manner in which we develop our programs and policies? And I'm glad that Absa is in the room, because the debate that we are having internally is how do we bring in the finance sector to support productive activities within the South African economy. The fiscus is quite constrained. That's a reality that we have to contend with. So my job is small. I don't want to stand between you and the food. I just hope that the debates and the discussions that were had in the last 2 days will help us in our respective areas of work, shape, maybe learn even from the practitioners. Some of the presentations today, they talk to their reality on the ground. I'm going to mention the Atlantis, how they have gone around, including the small medium enterprises as part of the SEZ development, which is quite a challenging a task. We have had a presentation from Vushaka around industrial parks, what we are grappling with from a policy point of view and from a development and an implementation a point of view. And some of these, I don't think these should not end here. We need to have programs that we can work with going forward to shape the discourse, so that we are not seen to just being talkers in government. And the issues of coordination have also been brought to the fore. There's a lot of programs that we have in government, and it's small programs that are not making the impact that they're supposed to be making. I think we are being asked to transform the South African economy industrially, geographically, and demographically. And that coordination, I think, becomes key if we want to transform the South African economy. There's a lot that has been said in the last 2 days. I just want to thank all the speakers that presented their work. It will help us going forward as we develop our industrial policy framework. I also want to thank the organizers, the dtic, Absa, for the support. I want to thank the University of Johannesburg that has been supporting, and they've had presenters that presented interesting and insightful papers. And the participants, without your participation and your contribution to this forum, we wouldn't be able to have the rich discussions that we've had in the last 2 days, in the 11 sessions that we had. Maybe so we needed to have a week. I'm kidding. You don't have all the time to do that. I want to thank you so much for that. and continue contributing to the public policy discourse in South Africa. We need to find innovative ways that will help us address the challenges that South Africa is facing. That South Africa is facing. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a good day further.